up in Podunk, middle of nowhere, Montana. My parents had very little. I remember drinking powdered milk, getting government cheese. It wasn't a life. And that's when I came to the realization. I'm like, hey, we're putting this away. Like we're rocking. Part of my journey is I'm okay being misunderstood. And so many people think I need to invest, or I need to do this with my job, or I need to find a new job. They'll say it, they'll think it, but they won't take the first step. The first time we hit $1 million, I'm like, I'm gonna go buy a bottle of Silver Oak. Some people go full in on dividends thinking it's more than what it is. And those are people that are gonna find out a long-term mistake if they put it in too heavy. Create your freaking goal. If you don't have something in place, well, guess what? You have zero right to be frustrated if you don't reach it. You can't retire young on a 401k. My goal was two things. One, I want to retire young, or if I don't, then I want to be the CEO. So the point is, make as much as you can, hit that 100K, and just be smart with your investments and learn.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round of Masters of the Market. I am incredibly excited to have on with me this week Brian Gornall, who is an investor through and through, who has made an incredible career, not only in the business field, but after retiring at 46 years old, got out of retirement, came onto YouTube, and is now teaching us all the ins and outs of business and investing. So Brian, first and foremost, welcome to Masters of the Market. Thank you for joining me here. I'm just going to pass the first question right over to you and ask you about your story and how you got to where you are today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. As far as answering the question, I made a lot of mistakes, so it's not exactly a straight path by any means. My family was not versed as far as financially. So, I grew up in Podunk, middle of nowhere, Montana. My parents had very little. I remember drinking powdered milk, getting government cheese. It was the lifestyle. That's kind of how everyone lived in that area. So for me, I knew I wanted to have goals and obtain things, but the only way to do that was essentially to learn. So I unfortunately couldn't get that from my family because they didn't really have that mindset. So I had to get it from other areas. So for me, I took a different path than most people. I went into the military. I did the Air Force. I wanted to serve my country. I enjoyed what I did, but it was also one of those things where I knew I didn't want to make it a career. So I was able to get my money to pay for college. So for me, that was kind of step one to kind of financially build out my path without having a lot of debt. So for me, that was kind of step one. From there, I was lucky enough to go into college straight out of the military. I went a very non-traditional path there too. I went into electrical engineering, did that for over 3 years, got to my senior year, and I decided I can't work with engineers because they think they're right. And I was just as guilty as everyone else. So I'm like, I can't work with this. So I came to the harsh realization that I like business so much more. So I went into operations and supply chain, which is kind of a math-based business. So for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And for me, I got very lucky because I happened to get an internship with a Fortune 50 company, Albertsons. I was able to jump right in, learn the company. I had a good personality. I had a willingness to work, and that resounded very well. So they really kind of pushed me and said, hey, you're just an intern, but you're going to get a full-time job. So then they hired me on. I was paid way more than I deserved out of college in 2005. And then suddenly, here I am working for Albertsons. I'm a merchant. I'm responsible for buying all the toys and everything else for the company. And from there, I moved on to Minneapolis. I went to Target. So I did that for a few years. And then I went over to Amazon. So that's kind of the career path. When it comes to my goal in gaining, I guess, wealth per se, because I always had a goal of, I didn't want to work forever. But at the time, I didn't have a family either. So for me, it was kind of the balance of I live in the single life, but also knowing at some point I do want to retire young and not have to be a slave to someone else's rules. I came to the quick realization, the quickest way for me to increase my wealth is to increase my revenue. Get on the top line. Make that top line, the funnel, grow as quick as you possibly can. So that was my approach. And honestly, for most millionaires out there, they take a I think 90% get it from real estate. And you have a background in real estate, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
Manhattan real estate.
So you know that, I mean, that is like the magic sauce that so many people have leveraged to actually build their wealth. I unfortunately didn't take that path. I didn't have that understanding. So for me, it was, I'm going to hit the corporate world. I'm going to do it as hard as I can. But I changed jobs every 18 months. I made it a point that I was going to change. And the reason why I did that, I didn't just pick this out of the air. When I was doing my internship for Albertsons, I was actually working in their human resources department for process improvement. And one of the jobs they gave me was, hey, we want you to like take every data point for every officer, every top performing manager in the company. And it was thousands of people. And they wanted me to review all the data. So I did regression analysis. I was doing everything I could to understand what is the defining reason for these people being the top performers, the top paid, executives out there. It had nothing to do with their education. It had nothing to do with their MBA. It had nothing to do with their sex, thankfully. So I mean, it was a very balanced outcome, but it all came to time and position. Every single one of them that was outperforming on every metric, they made it a point to learn and just move on to the next job, learn, move to the next job, and just keep building. So I'm like, okay, as soon as I found that out, that I made that my purpose. Like my 5-year plan is I'm going to keep doing this every couple of years. And I stuck to it. And the reality is, like, every time I changed job, even if it was internal, they would always give you like a 5 to 10% bump in pay. They don't always tell people this, but if you want to get like a raise from doing your job, it's not common. So, I mean, you have to be the top 1% most of the time to get something over and above inflation. And it's so rare because companies don't want to give raises. They truly just want to keep people producing at the level that they're at. I know because I used to be a manager among others, and that was kind of the force function at some of those places. So for me, I loved the fact that I could go somewhere new, learn a job, and the moment you come into those new areas with different perspectives, different ways of looking at things, everyone thinks you're a rock star, even though you don't, because admittedly, you feel like I'm an infant. I don't understand the processes. I don't understand your area. I don't understand everything that's going on. But you have this mentality of being fungible. You know that you can take on information, you can absorb it faster than anybody else, and you can just hit the road running really fast. And you have all these other resources, all these other people that you've worked with, where suddenly you have your own community within the company to just drive fast. So, I mean, for me, that was the platform. That was what really kickstarted for me, because once I would switch a company and go from one to the next, my income would almost double. And every time I do it, I would negotiate for every ounce of anything I could get. Usually I would try to push stock options as much as I could, just because I know that if I stand behind the company, I'm going to get that. But usually it's also the golden handcuffs, where if they're going to give you stock options, they know that, hey, you're going to have to stick with us for 4 years to get all of your vested interest. So for them, they're like, sure, they are more than willing to over negotiate in that area, because they just don't think most people are going to stick around. And that's especially true with Amazon, where I happen to negotiate the living tar out of that one, because like the average tenure at Amazon when I started in 2014 was 10 months. The moment I came into the office, I had a direct report quit. Like my first day on the job, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I got to learn your job now. And I'm okay with that. But I negotiated as many shares as I could. And that's like, if I could share anything with anybody, change jobs, get as much money as you can, and then negotiate as much as you can. I don't care if you feel like you're getting overpaid, just keep negotiating, because you're never going to get that chance again, because once you're in, you're never truly accepted as valuable as you are when you're first stepping in. That was true even when I was, hiring people when I was working at Amazon, because part of your job as a manager there is you would interview hundreds of people a year, which is a job in itself. You want to coach people along as far as, if you think you're going to make it for 4 years, try to squeeze the lemon as much as you can, because you're not going to negotiate with me for it. You're going to have to negotiate with HR. So, hey, best of luck and make it work for yourself. That was kind of the top part of my funnel as far as my journey. And then throughout, I made a lot of mistakes as far as investing. So like I even say it in my videos as far as I should have jumped on the HSA bandwagon right away. That was a huge mistake for me. And I think most millennials and Gen Y, like they are much better at understanding the HSA accounts and actually investing in them. And I think they're the top growers. I think Gen X and well, boomers, I mean, they're kind of out of the picture by now, but Gen X was horrible at it. And that's kind of I'm at the end of the Gen X, and it's funny because my wife is at the beginning of millennial, but I'm more millennial than her, and she's more Gen X than me. So we're not going to go there, but we make it work in our own little way. But for me, like that was a mistake. Also, when I first started with my 401k, like they don't give you a handbook that says bonds are a sure thing, but guess what? You're only going to get 3% out of it. So you got to know what you're doing. But it was kind of those key words. You're like, oh, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Well, mutual funds is kind of the safe way. So I think I want bonds. I didn't know what I was doing. So then I did a year of it and I'm like, wow, like my investments suck. Like I am not doing well. What is going on? Like I hear my friends say, yeah, like the economy's booming. I'm like, whoa, like I'm not seeing that. So then I had to start to research and understand, okay, what are my mutual fund options? What is everything in the company? Actually creating a spreadsheet and like, oh man, I made some really bad calls. One of them being, and I don't know if your company does this, when you get your options for mutual funds, they'll list out like retirement in 2050 or retirement in 2034. So they have like these year goals. And like here I am starting the job in 2005, and I'm like, well, hell, I want to retire in 2020. So put me on the 2021. Like I want to hit that. Well, no, that was my big mistake because it wasn't a high growth mutual fund. That was one that was a little bit more balanced out, where it's like 30% bonds and then the rest were stock, because it was kind of graduating, saying, oh, you're closer to retirement, so we need to take a less aggressive approach. So, I mean, that's one of those things where nobody's telling this to you. So, I mean, it sounds simple, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who are probably making those same mistakes right out of the gate. Now, because I started in 2005, 2008 was right around the corner. So, I mean, we're talking huge market crash coming up. I mean, what a great time to start a job. And then suddenly everybody is wondering if they're going to get fired, 2 years later. So that was a really icky time where it was more than challenging. I mean, anybody who's lived it, it was miserable. However, this is one where I became very savvy with my investments by this point. It had only been a couple of years, but I mean, I was diving deep because I had this goal. My goal was, hey, I wanted to retire in my 40s. I'm not doing this for a lifetime. So it was very interesting in the sense that come around 2007, hitting 2008, everyone was screaming, there's a bubble. There is a bubble. And I'm like, you know what? I remember this when I was in college around 2000, where the tech bubble was happening. Everyone was saying it. I'm going to take a risk. So I moved almost all of my 401k funds, which wasn't a lot at the time. I shifted it all over to bonds. I'm like, you know what? I knew it was a mistake before, but now this is going to be my safe play. I'm going to put almost all of it in bonds. I'm going to ride it out for like 6 months to a year. If the hype is true, then great. If it's not, I'll just be out a few percent for a year. I'll bounce back. And so, sure enough, like the market blew up. It just collapsed under itself. And, I sat on that for like 6 months. And I'm like, I know I'm probably not at the bottom, but I'm going to take the risk anyways. I waited till towards the third quarter, I think, of 2008. And I started to shift all of my money stacked back into the mutual funds. And that was by far the smartest move I had ever done. And everyone says, don't play the market. Don't try to time it. And I agree. Like I got lucky. I just happened to listen. My gut said one thing. I was willing to take the risk short term. And it just happened to pay off because, all of my funds that had exponential growth over the next 3 or 4 years, where everyone else had been wiped out and like they were just trying to get back to where they used to be. And I was on hog's heaven because, suddenly I was getting closer to that 100,000 mark, which was, there's a lot of videos out there right now where they're talking about, hey, that 100,000 mark, it's the hardest to hit. And they are completely true, because my first boss, I remember my colleague and I were like, my 401k just isn't growing. It's not doing much. Like I put into it but I'm not seeing much from it. And he's like, hey, like just focus on hitting 100,000. Do everything you can to hit that 100K. And he says, I promise you, when you see that hit, to go from 100 and double to 200, you're just going to start to see this just snowball, and you're going to have a very different perspective. He said that 100K is the hardest one, and he couldn't be more right. But I mean, I was able to hit it in just a couple of years because I got lucky. So once I did that, I know people don't want to hear that, like, hey, you got lucky. So great. How do I replicate that? Well, you can't, but you can replicate, get as much as you can on the front end, get the top of that funnel, get your income level as much as it can be. Like, I know a lot of people are preaching for, hey, get a side hustle, do these other things. And I agree. Like those things could turn into full-time jobs, like even doing a YouTube channel where suddenly it's a hobby. And now you're like, wow, I have to almost manage this like a business. So the point is, make as much as you can, hit that 100K, and just be smart with your investments and learn. So once I did that, it just opened up. And then, of course, once I negotiated higher stock options on top of higher salaries, everything just kind of came into place. And then, like, my defining win was the fact that I happened to start at Amazon in 2014, where the stock was like $300. And then over a couple of years, and I negotiated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stocks. So suddenly those bump up to $1,200 a share. And I'm like, and the thing is, working at Amazon, a lot of people think it's glamorous. I'm the first to tell you, it will test your demons, and it will test your angels in your life, because without a doubt, you're going to be tried like you've never been tried before. And that's why the tenure for most people is only like 10 months. And I don't know if that's the case anymore, but people are PopTarts. They're in and out pretty quick in a company like that. The reality is, like, if you're going to earn it, they're going to squeeze every bit of you too. So, I mean, for me personally, I was working like upwards of 60 plus hours a week on top of, a commute that's 2 to 3 hours a day.
Wow.
So, I mean, suddenly if you have a brand new baby, like my wife is a saint, because the reality is those years were horrible because I was never there. I was always traveling and working. It wasn't a life. And that's when I came to the realization. I'm like, hey, we're putting this away. Like we're rocking. Why don't we, like, I can call it quits. Hit the 46-year mark. I'm like, you know what? It was happened to be the year 2000 or 2020. Sorry. So it's 2020. And I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's just move back to North Minnesota. Let's be near her family. Cost of living is so much cheaper because daycare in Seattle is upwards of almost $3,000 a child. So, I mean, it's more than your mortgage in some cases. Sure. So it was just not a livable situation. So everything just happened to align. We were able to make the move. Our house like tripled in size and still paying less than we were in Seattle. I mean, it was just everything connected. And plus, the moment we left, COVID wound up hitting all of Seattle. Like, it happened to be at the hospital my wife was working at, like literally 2 weeks after we left. So, I mean, we just managed to just skate by, and hey, if luck plays a part, it plays a part, and I accept that. I have probably the strangest luck of anyone ever knew, but I accept it because there's balance in luck. Sometimes there's some crazy things that happen with it too. So that's it. I mean, that's my story. That's how I just happened to hit the timing right. I had to learn a lot, and I made a ton of mistakes, but that's part of the learning process. And hey, everything that I've learned in life is, if you're going to fail fast and just get back up and go.
You have said so much that I want to unpack, and wow, I don't even know where to begin. The first question I actually have for you on the business end, and it's something that you mentioned a couple times, which was jump to different jobs. And every time that you jumped, you learned something new, you leveled up, and then you jumped to a new job. And because of that leveling up and that new skill acquired, higher salary. Perhaps a traditional thought is that you shouldn't jump and you should gain time at a company so you can establish yourself as a quote unquote professional. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd say it depends on the role, it depends on the company, and it depends on your goal. Some people are successful doing that. If you're in a smaller company and like you're a rock star, chances are you can shine bright and you can move up. Potentially. There's also those businesses where, I mean, I've seen them, I've worked with them, where the average tenure is 30 years. Well, the reality is, if the tenure is 30 years, you're not moving up. You have to wait for someone to either retire or, I'm going to say, win the lottery. I'm not going to say pass away, but let's say they win the lottery or they retire. That's a long wait. But I'd say our lives are not conventional anymore. The business structure is not conventional. The lifestyle of having pensions is gone. Companies having authentic willingness to like grow their individuals is rare. If you find a company that vests in its people, like loves them, wants to, cultivate and grow and create their own leaders, absolutely. Then that's the company to be with if they're going to level you up. If they aren't, then create your own destiny. Like if they're going to level you up, then find where you can. Because the reality is, most of the big companies I've worked with, they don't care about the people. They care about the financials. They care about the cogs of the machine. They care about ins and outs and just make it happen. And it's sad to say, but the reality is you can have the best boss in the world. And I've had some great bosses, and those great bosses have often been fired or let go, or for whatever reason they disappear. And then your support network that was driving your growth sometimes goes with it. And that can be a scary situation if you're putting all of your eggs in one basket. And that's why, in my mind, and I only tell this to people who are fantastic performers, who can grow, who are hungry, and they are wanting to just drive further, absolutely jump ship. And people say, oh, but if you look at their, resume, I see that they've, done this. I'm like, bullshit. That is gold. Because the reality is you can come in and you can say, hey, yeah, from this job, this is what I learned. Once I peaked, then I wanted to go to the next level. And I asked my boss for direction on what he or she thought I needed to go into. So here I am in merchandising, and they suggest marketing because I should understand the dark side of the company too. Just joking, marketing isn't dark. But the reality is you need to understand the different functional areas of the company, because my goal was two things. One, I want to retire young, or if I don't, and let's say I don't have children, I don't get married, I don't do the things that are family oriented, then I want to be the CEO. So I have two paths. So I'm going to get as far as I can, and then I'm going to diverge. That's the path I wanted to take, me personally. And I'm glad I didn't take the path of CEO, because I like my life. I like hanging out with my 4-year-old and my 8-year-old and just loving every day.
Wow.
So does that help answer your question? I mean, that was a kind of a complex question to ask, because for some people it is the right path, but it has to be the right company. But I have so many friends where it just kills me. They've been in the same job for 15 years and they feel loyal to the company they're with, but the company's not going to promote them. They're not giving them any form of incentive to be there, but they're comfortable. They know their job. They know what's expected of them, and it's comfortable. For some people, if that's what they want, great.
Now, fast forward, 46 years old, you entered retirement. I guess you popped right out of retirement, then coming up on YouTube and making videos, and now sharing with all of us your, I don't know, lucky journey, but luck and preparation met. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Very well put.
Every video I watch of yours, I mean, it blows me out of the water. And there's so many insights. Now, throughout your career, and it's interesting now to hear on the back end of this, right? You've made a lot of mistakes, and it even sounds like you put a lot of money into bonds, right? Learn that lesson pretty quickly. When did you, really start to focus heavily on investing? And was it only in the 401k or the IRAs, or did you open up, just a brokerage and start throwing money in there, playing around? What were like your first steps into investing?
That is also such a great question, because you can't retire young on a 401k. Like, you just can't, because you can't take the funds out until you're a certain age limit. So like, that is one of the things that I had to learn very early on. Like, hey, if this is part of my goal, how do the funds work? And I don't think a lot of people take the time and effort to realize that. Like, yes, your 401k could become huge, but you're going to have huge penalties if you take it out before the right age. So for me, literally the moment I was tweaking my 401k and getting around that, I came to the quick realization that every time I would get a bonus, every time I would get a raise, all of that money I would simply shuffle aside, and I started to put that into my, true investment accounts. So I would start doing anything I could to research the companies. Like, I was lucky. I started putting into the Magnificent Seven. Well, it was probably the Magnificent Five at that point. But I mean, I was hitting hard on all the top companies. And even though I was working at Target, a fantastic company, I didn't buy a single Target stock. They gave me some, but I didn't buy any because it wasn't a good investment. And I knew like it wasn't going to see the growth I would be seeing from other companies. And I preach ETF and mutual funds, like, absolutely. If you don't know what you're doing, that is the right way to get started to really create a foundation. But once you start to know what's going on, you're going to see wicked growth from some of those stocks that you just, if you know they're the top in their area and haven't peaked and they're seeing potential, like 5-year growth it's gonna happen. It's gonna be there. Or it's a company that's driving a lot of revenue but no margin. Like that's my unicorn. I love those because that was what I experienced with Amazon, because like hot revenue but no real profits. It's going to come if it's managed well. And that's kind of the trick, is trying to find that out. So I would try to focus on those types of companies. Like, I was trying to invest in things like Tesla and like anything I could early on, because in my mind, it's just like, wow, an electric car. Like, I think that's so cool. And why wouldn't you like think that's amazing? Of course, everyone around me is like, that's the dumbest idea. Who would want an electric car? You're just going to plug it in? Like, you're going to have a cord running down there? I mean, all kinds of dumb comments, but I'm like, hey, part of my journey is I'm okay being misunderstood. I'm completely okay with that. But that's also a hard part of what I'm trying to do with what I'm sharing in my videos. Like, hey, like, you don't want to invest in something when it's peaked. You want to think about it now. Like, when I talk about eVTOLs, like the flying cars, I'm like, this will become a market. This will happen. And everyone's going to say, I wish I would have thought about that 10 years ago. And I'm like, the moment is now in things like that, or, hot technology. But you have to just take the risk and go with the top couple that you think are going to do well and see how it plays out. So that's part of the education part, where like you get a lot of feedback. And I mean, as you know, with YouTube, you get some comments where you just have to accept it. And you have to go, I respect your opinion. And you know what? You are welcome to it, because we don't know the outcome yet. We're all going to find out together. And I know people don't always appreciate seeing that as a response back from me, but that's the truth. The reality is I don't have a magic ball, and nobody does. And anyone who says that they know what's going to happen, or they know what crypto is going to explode, like, run to the hills, because that's the person who's going to lead you to the wrong direction, because nothing is a sure thing.
So let me ask you this, going off of that point, nothing's a sure thing. ETFs, I mean, if you just invested in the S&P, right, that's almost as surefire gets.
And I agree. And that's where, like, for beginners, like, create your base, create your sure thing, because you want to see the incremental wins and be happy with that. And then build from there. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like,
no, that you just, I mean, you nailed it. The next question I then have for you is, okay, you built that base, S&P, maybe it's VTI, right? It's a VU, something like one of those funds. Yep. How do you know when it's time for you to start taking on some individual stocks, building that risk appetite?
That's purely personal. Like it's going to be different for every person. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who will never have that comfort level. And I see it in my comments. They're like, why would you ever, go and put money into a stock? Like, that's the dumbest thing you could ever do. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but if I look at my Apple and my Microsoft stock over the past 20 years, I have to disagree with you, just because like they're behemoths. Like, they're just beasts, and they're going to continue to be beasts for a while. I always caveat that, because like, I worked for Jeff Bezos. I mean, I was in meetings with Jeff Bezos. He is brilliant, but even he would say, Amazon is a star today, but at some point the company will dissolve. It will become nothing more. Kind of like Kodak. Kodak was like the biggest company there was for film. And now like it's having a regrowth, but it completely dissolved at one point. And now it's starting to have a comeback because of film and authenticity and different reasons. But Jeff is right. I mean, every company at some point mismanages itself to disillusionment. It just falls apart at some point. But for me, go with the no-brainers. Go for the Magnificent Seven. Like, get those, let them grow, and then see how they do. I mean, I made a lot of dumb mistakes where, like, let's say Tesla, I was investing in that, and then I would invest in companies that were going to be, pushing for chargers or hydrogen and like Plug Power and a couple other ones where like they totally blew up. Like they just did horrible. But I invested small because they weren't a sure thing for me. But the ones that I know are just strong companies, like I put in heavy in those. Like for me last year, I went heavy with Nvidia. I went heavy with Palantir, and those two areas like have blown up my portfolio. Like it's just like, you know what? Anything else is cream after that because those two just made my day.
How would
So
you recommend going about dividend stocks or marrying them into your portfolio? Because, for example, right, I just saw one of your recent videos on ETFs, dividend ETFs, right? So you throw in these dividend videos. So there must be somewhere in your investment strategy that's a call for dividends.
for me, dividends are very specific for a strategy. Now, for me, if you're somebody who's older, closer to retirement, blue stock dividend companies are perfect because they're brands that have been around forever. They're going to consistently be around. You know you're going to get that paycheck. You know it's a sure thing. You can manage the taxes on it with no major issue. But that is a strategic play. So for me, I do have them. I have them very little because for me, it's kind of muddy as far as managing the taxes on it because I know I'm paying a tax on it. I'm trying to reinvest them, but even then, I'm not reinvesting them back into the dividend ETF itself. I'm putting them, it's my play money. So then I start to play with those dividends and put it into my other like smaller growth companies that suddenly far outperform, in some cases, my dividend ones. But my dividend, like it's the blue collar worker. It's the tried and true. It's gonna be there. It's a stone wall. I can count on it, and I use it for my play money, which I know that's ridiculous because very few people do that. They see it as, hey, let's reinvest it. Let's get the snowball effect going, which is true. But I also try to teach this in my videos, and I'm sure you probably saw it, where so many people are confused about dividend stock and ETF, where they think the math is so different than it is sometimes because the total return takes out the expenses. The total return has the dividends reinvested. So if you're seeing that ETF or that company and it says it's 10% and their dividend is a 5%, some people think it's 15. And their minds are just like, it's 15, it's 15. And I'm like, I can't convince you any differently. The total return is 10. I admire your vigor and your willingness to like really drive this home. I'll accept your opinion for what it is. Please, like, I don't want you to get 20 years down the road and find out you made a mistake. So I mean, some people go full in on dividends thinking it's more than what it is. And those are people that are going to find out a long-term mistake if they put it in too heavy. That's where I say diversity. Like, you got to have things to contrast and compare within your own portfolio to see what levers are working for you. And there's a place for everything. And it just depends on what your strategy is. So question for you, like, because you talk about it so much, what is your strategy with your dividend investments?
So it's actually funny. I was going to follow this up by saying a lot of people, and of course, my channel is a dividend investment channel. I have growth stocks in my portfolio. I just don't get the chance to talk about them frequently because so many viewers want more dividend content,
They love it.
which they love it. It's great. I love dividends too, but I actually am hyper focused even more recently on growth. Like Google was a heavy focus in the past 8 months, 9 months when it dipped below 100. And as a
Yeah,
dividend investor, and I made a video and I got the comments saying, why would you do that? Stick to the dividends, stick to the dividends. But I can tell you, I made a great return on Google and Amazon as well as in there, Tesla's in there. So I think it's important to marry dividends,
absolutely.
but not
Absolutely.
100%, especially at my age, right? I'm not near retirement. So I think that's a factor. You mentioned something that I'm actually super curious about.
Yeah,
You sat in the room with Jeff Bezos. I have read so many Jeff Bezos books. I am obsessed with how he thinks, how he looks at the world, his perspective on business. The latest book I read was the Bezos letters, and it broke down every year. He wrote a letter, and it broke down these letters, like kind of like the psychology of the letters. Fascinating book. What I'm getting at here, though, is how important is management, and how do we investors come to understand management, and if it's like a good leader, a good manager? Because oftentimes those, like take an Elon Musk or a Bezos, these are the unicorn stocks to rally behind. But how do we really know that these leaders are going to produce the unicorn?
that is so impossible to gauge. And it's something that I'm always watching because, I mean, you're keying on something that's so pivotal because the leadership of a company is everything. How they can communicate with investors, the investment community, is so important. And when you read those letters about Bezos, one of the things he does say quite often is he's okay being misunderstood because he is a visionary, because he can see like the 5 steps down the road. Most of us aren't. We're transactional. As investors, we're transactional. It's like, what are you doing for me today? What are you doing here and there? And like I could talk about strategy associated with Amazon for days just because it's a misunderstood company because so many people see it for what they see on the platform, but they don't see like the iceberg underneath as far as the foundation they are creating. Like they're going to be a supply chain like monster. And people see it, but I don't think they see it. At some point, Amazon's going to completely go away with trying to manage their own inventory and product. And they just want to be a platform and manage everyone else's product in their supply chain network because that's where profit is. That's where free cash flow is. Like there's so many things that are happening that people are just so oblivious to. And I, I just think that once they tweak those things, like their stock is going to blow up again because people are going to realize, oh wow, yeah, they just built several hundred, FCs across the country. The land value of their FCs is probably more than all the stock currently. Like there is so much happening that people just don't even recognize. So I'm digressing completely, but talking about the leaders of a lot of companies, they don't stand out. Like they're not memorable. Like I'll watch quarterly earnings reports. I'll listen to them. Some of them are so generic and so bland, but some who have the energy, like for Nvidia, for like even AMD is starting to like do so much better with what they're trying to showcase. It's almost a performer and like a motivator within the entire investment world. And I'd say Jeff was very unique. And Jeff is also, he had so many rules. And you're going to read about him. Like people are like, oh, yeah, it's a one pizza lunch. Like you only have so many people who can be there who will eat one pizza. Yeah, that's bullshit. Because I'll tell you what, I went to almost every meeting where it'd be stacked with 50 people, and there is no way one pizza would have fed us. I mean, so yes, he had rules and nobody followed. So, I mean, it was kind of funny in that sense, but also the structure of the business. You're reading his notes, his letters. Guess what? Everyone who works at Amazon learns how to write. If you don't know how to write, you're going to damn well learn because guess what? You're going to be writing 2 to 3 docs every week for the rest of your career while you're there. So you become very good at finding the message, be succinct, get it across. And that is something I struggle with now because that's who I am. And to create YouTube content that tells a story and isn't just succinct is hard for me to do sometimes because I'm like, okay, I need to weave this together. I need to make it like thematic so people can kind of stand behind it, learn and kind of grow from it. But the Amazon part of me is like, I need to hit these 5 bullet points. I need to jump right into it. And next thing you know, like it would be a 3-minute video that kind of gives you everything you need, but you're just going to have to push pause every couple of seconds to kind of see what I've got for the information. But that isn't what works for YouTube. Like they want consumption. I have to learn a new style, but that's me. I love to learn. Like I love to learn how to edit and do different methods to get there. But once again, I'm digressing. The whole part about like the leader is everything. Finding the right leader to work for is extremely important. Now, Jeff was fantastic at creating this vision, getting his leadership team behind it. But I have to fault him just a little bit in the sense that his emotional quotient was probably one of the lowest I've ever seen, because he really didn't care. Like, he felt like he's living his life, he's experienced his life, therefore everyone can relate to him in his life, but he doesn't really relate to everyone else's. So like, I remember, like, so many of us lived on the east side of Seattle, and we're like, okay, it takes us 2 to 3 hours. Could we get a bus system to help get us to work, so that we're not spending all that time? We can actually work. Like, we're trying to convince him, hey, these are ways where we'd be more productive if we could work on the bus and not have to be in traffic all this time. And his thought was, he should have never moved on the east side. But he's living in 20 years ago, when he thought people could afford to live in Seattle. So he's just mismatched in some areas. But to his credit, when you go into a meeting with him, he is as brilliant as people say. Because I remember I went into a meeting and we were all given a document. This is standard procedure. You get a document for what we're in the meeting for. Everyone just sits there quiet for about 5 to 10 minutes. We all read the document, and then we start to have discussion points. And we all read it, and Jeff started right off, which is also a nomenclature that's different from what everyone here. They always say, oh, Jeff always is the last one to talk. Yeah, that's also bullshit. So right away, he jumped right into the meeting, and he's like, okay, here's the situation with dog food. The real problem is with this particular protein. It's being used as a binding agent. It's causing allergic reactions. And that's not even in the document. He just knows this information because he is so well read. He's so well knowledgeable that he knows this particular protein is being used in dog food, to being used as a binding agent, even though it wasn't even talked about in the document. So, I mean, from that moment on, I was like, okay, this is a guy you're never going to bullshit. So you better be at the best you can ever be when you're in a meeting with him. And thankfully, I never had to discuss anything with him in a meeting. However, I did get a lot of emails from Jeff, which is the kiss of death, because all it is a question mark. Because some random person will be complaining about Amazon and they'll send an email to Jeff. Completely their right to do. Unfortunately, Jeff reads them all. He'll read it, and if he looks at it and goes, yeah, there's something wrong there, he'll put a question mark on it and he'll send it to you, and your life is upside down for the next 4 days, because all you're working on is this email, because there's a standard procedure on how you have to respond to his email. You have like 2 hours to create a quick recap, send it to him, and tell you like the timeline when you're going to have it addressed and fixed, and when you're going to have a resolution. It's hell. Like, nobody wants to experience that. And after you get several of them, you're like, all right, I've got my Jeff template, so I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start this process. I'm going to power through, call my wife. All right, I'll see you in a week, because guess what? I'm working on a Jeff email. It's the worst thing anybody could ever have. That's the glamorous part no one really talks about. But to your point, he is purely genius. He has earned everything he deserves, and I can't fault him for any of that.
I want to ask you now about your investment portfolio. How many stocks do you have in there? How did you construct it? When did you get started with ETFs? What was like the process for you?
Process for me was, originally, it was all about mutual funds, because that was really all I had in 2005. And then like brokerage accounts started to become more mainstream. So like, I don't know, I think it was like E-Trade was the first one. It was like $10 trades, like $9.95. Before, like, that didn't really exist. Like, you'd have to contact an actual like brokerage account, or an actual investment firm to make the investment for you. Because I remember a friend buying mutual funds in like 1995 when he was in the military. He was smart. He was putting his money, in a way. And I'm like, how did you even know to do this? He's like, I read a book, and he figured it out. I'm like, awesome. The rest of us don't have that, but thankfully we all have YouTube and every access available. So for me, I started with the mutual funds, and then I started to get my brokerage account going, and then I started to top stock. Like, for me, I was big into technology then. I was like focused on the things I was passionate about and thinking of, wow, this is a cool company. I'm pretty sure in 10 years, they're only going to get bigger. Having worked in retail with Albertsons and then, of course, with Target and the other ones, I knew that retail is a very finite space. Like, yes, Walmart has done phenomenal. Like, they are like just massive. But for most other companies, like retail isn't a stock that I would focus on just because they can only grow at a slow pace. Like, we're going to build 50 stores next year. Great. Like, that's the growth you're going to get. We know what that equates to. In that sector, I just started to kind of weed through the sectors of what didn't make sense for me. So like for me, oil and gas seemed like a no-brainer. It's a resource that's going to go away. That was a great decision. I think it's still a very good decision, even though we're, trying to get clean energy. But guess what? It's not going to happen overnight. We're still going to need those things. So I mean, there's things where logically you can break it down and be, yeah, like that makes sense. Yeah, people are going to need this. We're going to need to do this, and demand can only go substantially up. And I think that's the hardest thing is, I guess, working in retail. You understand how consumers operate, and you know that like they're seasonally relevant. They're going to hit on things in certain parts of the year. There are staples they're always going to need. So this is where the dividend play really comes in, because dividends are also my safety net. They're my security blanket, because I know if there's a downturn, like the delta is pretty low on dividends companies. They're going to be like your consumer packaged goods or CPG companies, like things that people need every day. They can't live without them. So guess what? You're not going to see a big dip. So like that's a safe play. So absolutely, that's a strategy I think everyone needs to think about, because if you put everything into high growth, you're going to be hating life the moment that they have a drawback and suddenly it has a year of 40% down and you're like, my $200,000 is only worth like 120 now. What's going on? Guess what? You're going to have to ride out the next 2 years to kind of find your balance. But if you leverage some of those safety blankets, you're kind of smoothing it out. Like you figured out like, hey, this isn't going to be so bad. And it just kind of, it's more, for me, it's a psychology factor as far as everything's okay. Like we're going to make it through this just fine. Sometimes the high growth, you get a little worried that it's not going to bounce back. I really focused on what I thought was going to be long-term, and I hit those stocks. I didn't play with a lot of stocks early on. I just went with the high growth. And then I would just start to hitting the ETFs that I knew were readily available. The problem was ETFs weren't really available back in 2005 to 2010. Like it was starting to gain momentum, but it wasn't readily available. If you wanted Vanguard, you'd have to get their Vanguard mutual funds. If you wanted the Vanguard, funds, guess what? Their minimums were $3,000. So I mean, there were all these hurdles. And then suddenly, like Robinhood comes onto the play, and it's like fractional shares. I can put in $10 and I'm getting like that much of any stock I want, even though, Berkshire Hathaway is 400 and what, oh gosh, now I think it's like 600,000. But like when I first started getting to Berkshire, it was only like 400,000. I'm like, oh, is this going to go up? Well, yeah, it goes up. So for me, it was just kind of creating those incremental steps of, hey, when they're available, I started to invest in them, but I'm still changing some of my ETFs today because I'm constantly looking at them and going, what are my overlaps? And I talk about that in a lot of my videos today, because even though I buy these ETFs, they're being managed and they're changing the weight of the portfolio. They're changing the holdings. And suddenly I find myself having some ETF where I'm like, there's a 40% overlap. I don't need these two. Let me maybe take a risk and go with this one over here that's going to be an anti, ETF against QQQ, or there's so many plays, there's so many angles. So for me, that's kind of the process that I've taken. Now, your question about how many different stocks I own, so that is a nightmare for me. So I literally just started getting I think I started using Seeking Alpha or one of those different sites where I'm starting to pull in all of them, because I have so many different brokerage accounts, because I have to do videos that talk about different brokerage accounts. So I have the accounts open with plenty of stock in there. And it's so hard to track it all, because I'm like, I think at one point, I didn't realize that I had doubled down on NVIDIA like 2 years ago. So I had, like, across all my accounts, I had a lot of NVIDIA. And today I'm very happy I did that. But at the time, I wasn't paying attention. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these accounts, I have so much overlap. Like, I need to focus on kind of bringing this together. I literally probably have, and I don't know this off the top of my head, it's probably close to probably 50 or 60 individual stocks, because I have some for dividend. I have a lot for growth. So I put like 80% within my sure thing, where it's companies I know are solid performers, but still growth. And then I leave like that 20% for my, hey, I'm just going to put a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there, and see how they do. Like, I think they'll be good, but they're so small. Their leadership isn't stellar. Like, they're not selling it very well. Their marketing material is poor. There's just so much opportunity. And especially anything AI, it's a crapshoot with half those companies. Like, some of those companies within AI, they're skyrocketing, and I don't even know why, because I don't know what the demand is on their product. And those are ones I kind of hesitate on. I'm not jumping in on you because I don't know what your real product is. Like, I don't know why I think you're going up because of hype.
So you 50 to 60 individual stocks, but you also mentioned that you have ETFs in there. How many ETFs do you think you have?
So ETFs, I'm going to guess I probably have around probably 20. Now, one thing I do want to like share with you is, like, I have no mutual funds anymore. I got rid of all my mutual funds. And some people are going to stop and go, well, so what did you do with your 401k? So the moment I retired, I could do what I wanted with my 401k. I mean, you have the opportunity of moving it into your own setup. And so many 401ks, like, you have your canned options. Like, everyone has like 15 to 20 mutual funds. And I hate that, because the reality is you have guardrails. You have limits on what you can make. And guess what? Like, those companies are offering ones that they get a little bit extra money from. So they have their expense ratios baked in, and you don't even get the best funds. So I hate that. But ETFs are like, they're watered down. They're diluted so much where, yeah, you could have that one company that's exploding, but guess what? You've got 200 other companies that are just barely getting by. So the ETF only goes up, 10%, which is wonderful. But the stock of some of those other companies are up 50, 60, 70, 200% in a year, where I want that. Like, I'm greedy in the sense that if you can hit the right companies, I want that. I don't want to be giving it away in an ETF that's diluted, but I want the security of my ETFs. But within the self-directed, and this is the thing that I love as well, I can invest in real estate. So that's the angle, like, is super important to me, because I can put it over there and everything vests, and it's tax-free until I sell or until anything else. So I can take, $1 million in a 401k, invest that in properties that are going to appreciate over time. I can be collecting all the different areas. I can pay myself for managing it. So if I need to do things associated, so I can make my time worth something. So I mean, it has so much opportunity, and I need to talk about that more later on. But that's something very few people are aware of, because it gives you so many more options. And whenever you leave a company, they give you the option, like, what do you want to do with your 401k? Do you want to just roll it over to the other one, or just keep it where it is? And for me, now that I know this, I would say, if you're savvy enough and you want to manage your own, do it. All of my life now is about tax strategies and how to manage everything that's just growing at, thankfully, a good tick.
Sure. Well, it's always interesting, because my father always talked about understanding taxes to play the game of taxes. A lot of people make a lot of money but lose a lot in taxes, which
Absolutely.
is something I always took away. Like, even doing your own taxes will benefit you greatly, instead of just giving it to somebody else and never actually learning.
I couldn't agree more.
I want to put you on the hot seat with this question. But Brian, what is the total value right now of your stock portfolio?
That is one thing I will not share. And there is one reason why I never share what I have as a total. I don't trust the world. Meaning,
Anybody?
I don't trust people knowing it. And that was advice that I've been given several times. Like, don't ever share what you're worth, because Do you want a little target on yourself or do you want a big target on yourself? So you're welcome to ask the question. Unfortunately, I will never answer it.
I have to say, I think that's the greatest answer I've ever gotten from that question. This is the wisest. I'll say the wisest, the greatest answer. I guess I'll ask this differently because I have a gut feel of where you are. You retired at 46 years old. So if I or anybody else out there wanted to retire at 46 years old, where would you recommend? And let's say maybe we're a beginner investor, or maybe we've had some, experience investing, like you had mutual funds for a long while, but shifted. What would be your three-step process to shift into gears to get to retirement at 46 like you did?
Three things? That's impossible, but I'll try my best. I would say one, work on your revenue. Get that revenue get the funnel as big as you can. Like make as much as you can, because the sooner you can, that's the way you're going to build the wealth the most. Two, manage your finances. Like you have to get everything under control. You need to understand what your debt is. You need to understand, what are you spending? It's so funny. My wife and I are polar opposites in certain things. Finances is one of them, where I track everything that we spend. And I look at it. Even today, I look at everything because I put it into QuickBooks and I mark everything as far as personal or business. And I'm like, what was this for? Oh, and did you realize that we spent X number of dollars, last month on children's clothing? My wife's like, yeah, I did get a little out of control because there was a sale at Carter's and I just really went to town. I'm like, yeah, you did. But I understand we need to do that. Like we ebb and flow. But so many people have zero context of what they're spending and where they're spending. And I'm not an advocate of anyone saying, take everything out of your life that brings you joy. Like if you like the expensive coffees like I do, get the expensive coffee. Enjoy it. Like live all day long. Do you need one every day? Questionable. Me, I make it a treat. I try to make everything kind of a reward situation for myself, and also gamification. Like that is one thing where you hear a lot of people talk about it. That is something that works for me because I'm highly motivated. I want to achieve. I make everything a game. So like I create deadlines for myself. Can I save this much to this period? Can I do this? And if I do it, then I'm going to buy myself a $500 bottle of wine and I'm okay with it. Or can I reach this goal? And we're going to take that Disney vacation because that's stupid expensive for a family of four. Like things are compromise. And I think so many people live without compromise. They live with take it for what it's worth. Like I am where I am. I'm going to have what I have. And I'm just going to live with as much as I can garner with what I have. There's repercussions. And you're never going to hit a goal if you never make the goal. And I'd say like that's the third point. The third point is create your freaking goal. If you don't have something in place, well, guess what? You have zero right to be frustrated if you don't reach it. Because I'd say half the people I talk to, one of the first things I'll say is like, I love that you retired young. I want to retire young. I'm like, great. When? Well, young. I'm like, what does young mean to you? I'm like, oh, well, I'd like to do it in 20 years. Okay, what's your plan? There is no plan. Like you need to have some type of a guardrail in place because even if you don't hit it, if you come close, great. If anything in business that's taught me is don't be disappointed for not achieving a goal you never set for yourself. And so many people do that. They get upset when something doesn't happen their way or it isn't given to them because they never put themselves out there to get it in the first place. Even right now, I want to hit 10 more properties within 5 years. Like that is a goal I have for my real estate area. 10 properties, 2 years. 10 properties, 5 years. So I'm going to try to hit 2 every year, which is completely viable. I just need to set aside the time and the process to do that. But I'm going to hit it because, well, I know I'm going to hit my goals because they're realistic and it's going to happen. If you just say, man, I really want to be in real estate, well, unless you take the first step, you're never going to get there.
I mean,
so how about you? I'm curious, only because
yeah.
I've like read your background. Like I know some bits about you. You work in the corporate world because you're like with Tip Ranks. You used to be at Yelp, correct?
I started off at Yelp. That's where I did very well at Yelp, and I was in an AE. So
Okay.
that was fun. I did really well. in sales. And then I actually shifted gears. I went into fundraising. From fundraising, I realized that there's no take home. So, so I immediately, after less than a year, I left. I raised about 3+ million. And when I got that fat check at the end of the year, it was nothing. I said, I'm out. I kind of did what I wanted to do to contribute somewhere, and I left. And that's when I got into real estate. But I think I did one thing for myself that was bar none just the best career move I've ever made. I used fundraising to network with the people I
Nice.
wanted to get into business with. And so they were all talking money, and they were the donors, and they were where I wanted to be. And so I said, well, how do I get there? Connect with the people who are already there. And that's when I got into real estate in Manhattan, which was a different ball game. I was in asset management, the best time. I was managing a couple buildings, and it was like being the mayor of two little cities within New York. I
Love it.
absolutely loved it. And it was just, it was reporting to the owner of the buildings, and then people. And you just had to be quick with everything. And the owner
Oh,
wants
I'm sure.
X, and everybody else wants Y. You're dealing with the owner in the morning, and everybody else in the afternoon and the evening. So it was a lot of fun. For a while, I thought I wanted to get into politics, but it's a lot of
I was
BS in
almost going to
politics.
say, that's
Yeah.
almost a perfect political segue right there.
Yeah, Ari Gutman for the people. That's what I always joke with my girlfriend. But politics for me, I mean, no, I think the movers and the shakers of the world are the people who are actually behind the scenes. They make money, they put the money where they want it to go, and that is really how you create change agents. So like a Bill Ackman approach. It's been an interesting journey for me, even goal wise with YouTube, right? And how it's starting to grow. But everything I make from YouTube goes right into stocks and retiring early. But as you were speaking, like it was like, well, when exactly the exact age that you want to retire early? What is that age? I don't know. I got to get off this call and go sit down and actually pick that age out. So I'm happy you mentioned that.
So I love, like, one, your background. It's super diverse, and the fact that it sounds like you're taking a learning from each thing, which isn't that different from what I was originally talking about, because like you have very broad diversity, which is kind of building up for everything that you do. But when you mentioned the part about, yeah, you're right. What age do I want to retire at? I, I'm leaving out a key point with that. So you can create a goal, but if you're going to pick a year, uh, you have to work backwards, and that's a whole process, and that's
Sure.
something that I'd say I over excelled and learned a great amount from Amazon. Like, is in life, you have to figure out what that goal is, but you have to do a backwards process. You have to work it back, find out what you need at each stage so that you can create each incremental goal along the way. Because guess what? It doesn't happen like, it doesn't go A to Z immediately. Like, you have to hit all of those little segues. So you have to have the mini goals along the way, and celebrate them. Celebrate the freaking wins. So like for my wife and I, early on, like the first time we hit $1 million, I'm like, I'm going to go buy a bottle of Silver Oak. Now, Silver Oak, like some people will say, well, that's not super expensive. Well, if you don't embellish on things like that all the time, it is kind of an expensive bottle of wine. So for me, I'm like, all right, that's our thing. So whenever we hit any milestone, it's like, all right, going to the store. We're going to get a Silver Oak or an Opus One. Those are my two go-tos for wine. But celebrate the freaking wins. Like, so many people, they'll hit something and like there's no achievement. There's no. You have to be your own award setter sometimes, because like my wife and I, like, we're the best cheerleaders for one another, and she knows that like once I get my mind set on trying to do something, like I'm gonna do everything I can to hit it, which also drives her crazy. But in the same sense, she likes the wine. So hey, it's kind of a win-win.
How important would you say is celebrating the win to for all investors? Because so many of us, and I'm guilty of this, I'll be the first one to say it. I will get to the goal, create the next goal, and go again.
So that's totally up to you. But psychologically, in my mind, it's a miss. So like I just got my 100,000 subscriber.
Heck yeah.
I just got it the other day. Like,
Is that why
I've
it's shining so bright in the
been, I've been on a weekend bender. Like I've gone out with every friend I can reach. We're like, we're gonna go drink. We're gonna celebrate this. Like everyone has just been so fun about it because I've had so many supportive friends. So to me, it's kind of a social aspect, but it's also like I think about work, and you might be able to relate to this. If you've ever worked on a project and you're like, okay, we want to launch this product, this item on date X, and you do everything, the whole team is like focused on it, you get it, you achieve it, and you come in the next day and you're like, wow, we launched that, we did it. And you come in and it's like, well, crap, today feels just like yesterday. And guess what? The leadership team comes in and goes, wow, you hit what we needed. We want you to do it again in half the time. Go.
Yep.
And it's like, I didn't take a breath. I need to take a breath. And when you're in that culture and that society of doing things, suddenly you lose value. You lose value in yourself. You lose value in what you're trying to accomplish. Excuse me. And that's why whenever I have teams, like I'm like, we celebrate every win. We're gonna go out. We're gonna go rent a boat. We're gonna go drinking around the lake, Lake Washington. We're gonna do whatever we want to do, but we need to celebrate it. But that's me and my way of operating. And I think people need that breath because if you don't, you're not going to be refreshed to hit the next segment of what you're trying to achieve. So for you, like take a step back, think about how do you feel if you don't celebrate it? And how excited are you to keep going to hit the next section when you don't have anything to celebrate it with? I mean, I even asked my friends, like when I went out, we'd hit a bunch of breweries over the weekend. I'm like, seriously, guys, like, thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being there. But how do you guys celebrate your wins? And it wound up being this massive conversation where some people had some really unique ways that they kind of like they have their own traditions on what they do. And then some people are like, man, I'm jealous. You guys seem to be doing this better than me because we're not doing this. And that's the same person who probably isn't doing as many goals and isn't hitting on as many because they're just trying to survive life with their kids. And I get that too. Surviving the kids is half the challenge. But man, my advice to anybody, celebrate that win. Question for you, like what, if you were to think of a celebration, like how would you celebrate a win for yourself?
vacation somewhere just very, very peaceful, very zen on a beach, probably outside of this window. There's a beach and I feel like I'm on vacation every day, but to go vacation somewhere else and just like maybe, I don't know, a coconut would, I don't know, something like that.
Just completely
Exactly.
detach and enjoy it.
Yeah. To know I'm out of my own city. Yeah. I want to ask this question. What do you think the most common mistake that is made business wise and investor wise, just like in life? What's the most common mistake here that we're making across the board, that if you were to just narrow it down the Amazon way to one thing that you think that a lot of people are making, that if we corrected that, we would immediately shift gears into, well, really this Brian-esque, live a little bit more freer lifestyle?
That is so difficult, but good. It's a good question, but super difficult to pinpoint because how do you pick the one problem when there's dozens of problems? I think part of it is just motivation. Like you're not going to get to the end unless you take the first step. And I kind of think of like, even like you might relate to this, the YouTube journey. You're never going to have the perfect video, but guess what? You're not going to have 1,000 subscribers unless you make the first video. And so many people think I need to invest, or I need to do this with my job, or I need to find a new job. They'll say it, they'll think it, but they won't take the first step. So once again, like don't expect something without putting in the effort. How about you? Like when you think of like what was the first thing that kind of motivated you? What was it?
It's interesting. There's two things. One, I think fear runs through all of us, right? Fear of missing out, but on the other end of that spectrum, fear of losing everything. So you're stuck. But again, if you don't take that step in either direction, you're just going nowhere fast. So there's fear that's always at hand. My biggest motivator, is actually stems from how I grew up. with divorced parents. Wasn't a pretty divorce. And I just grew up thinking, I will never be in this position again to not be able to afford right clothes for my child or braces or Accutane. I had a lot of acne when I was a kid, right? But that was like, I never want my future kids to worry. As a matter of fact, I never want my family to ever worry again. So that is still my motivation today, where it's like, I'm a workhorse, man. Like I'll go all day, all night. I've done some of these interviews at 3 a.m. I mean, the one that is airing right now as we speak, that was done last week at 3 a.m. and it was
Oh my
awesome. You
gosh.
know, and I was hyped up. He's like, "Man, how are you tired?" I'm like, "I'm ready to go," right? Because it's like, I did get my sleep after that, but it was still that driver, right? And I love it. I thrive on it. I read a book a week. I
Good.
love being busy. I love learning. So these are all like these bits and pieces of motivation. And the ultimate is like when I look at, eventually becoming a father, God willing, I'm looking at three things here. I think any father needs to be a good teacher. Well, first I'll go the order of priority, right? A provider and a protector and a teacher. So how can you be a provider, protector, and a teacher if you aren't learning every day, making it happen, and protecting family is not just macho man. It's total security. We will never
Absolutely.
be on the street, be in a bad financial position. My girlfriend and I always joke. I always say, if we ever went homeless, God forbid, I'd be a great homeless partner, right? It's like you take the food, you take the tent, you take everything, and just keep going and just keep hustling. But it's an interesting question, like what these motivators, and I think that in and of itself, talked about YouTube, growing the YouTube channel. At 25 subscribers and one like, maybe even no likes on a video, it's not so cute, right? Like you're sitting there
Oh,
and you're like, what am I doing?
it's an ego kill. It just
Yeah.
hurts.
So that's my biggest driver, my biggest motivation is like just become those three things for, really good book is The Infinite Games. I don't know if you read this book
I
by
haven't.
Simon Sinek. Incredible book, but when I read it, I said that's how I live life, because he talks about two ways to live. You're either playing a finite game or you're playing an infinite game. And the finite game is all about how to win, and it's all about this, right? There's a time clock, and one day I'll be happy win, I'll be happy win, I'll be happy win. It never comes. But the infinite game is like, I'm doing this for the 10 generations that come after me. And so I can die, tomorrow. And if I only brought in, $1,000 between now and tomorrow, I at least did it for a cause that was greater than myself, and I won. And that difference is a driver. YouTube for me, like if I could just help one person, I won. So
Absolutely.
0 likes or one like, one view was a win. And that's kind of how I looked at everything. I want to go.
Like that is a great response.
Thank you. I want to go a little bit deeper here. How many kids do you have?
I have two
Two
girls,
kids.
4 and 8. And honestly, I gotta say, as far as motivation, I don't speak about it personally,
Sure.
but you keyed on it very well. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, like we didn't grow up with much. I mean, literally, if you wanted to go to a McDonald's, it was a 6-hour drive. Like, I don't think people understand. Like, if you live in Podunk, middle of nowhere, America, that's what it looks like. Like, you don't have a store to go buy jeans or a shirt. Like, you you try to go to the store once a year. So I have that mentality that you mentioned, as far as I don't ever want to be in that situation. I don't want my family to ever be in that situation. And God, for like, thankfully, we aren't in that situation. I don't think we ever will. But I also try to, also to somewhat of your point, I do have kids, and I'm setting them up for generational wealth. Like they're going to be on my payroll once they hit, a little bit older, and they can help a little bit so that I can legally do it. But they're going to have, very large accounts by the time like they're 40, 50, where they probably could retire, just because we're making the steps now so that they don't have to worry about it. If they want to become a teacher that doesn't pay anything, I don't care. They can do that because they're going to have the right foundation to do what they want, to make the biggest impact in the world that they can. So it kind of hits on a couple things you said that I really found passionately good about, because maybe I wasn't able to impact the world as much as I wanted to with everything, but I really hope my kids can. And if I can set them up to do that and have that freedom at a younger age than even I have, great. I want that. And I also want to help everyone else to hit their goals, hopefully a little bit easier. But what you said really kind of resonated, and I appreciate that. That was a really good comment on your part.
Thank you. I want to go a little deeper with you. You've seen a lot of success. You have the passion that I feel through the screen, and you have 2 kids, as you just shared, and you're setting them up already. And I asked this question to somebody who is very similar to you, so I'm excited for your response. If you were to leave your kids with one piece of advice, I mean, that's on a personal level, just one piece of advice for your kids to take in and live with for the rest of their life, what piece of advice would you give them?
That is the impossible question. However, one of the things I struggle with, and this is personal, in the sense that, like, my oldest daughter's 8, and I was watching the news, and she came into the room. She looked up, and it had all these newscasters on the screen, and it was essentially all women and one gentleman. There were the professionals of these newscasters talking about a situation, and she looked up and she said, "Why is it all women?" And it actually hurt me, because I'm like, wow, she's 8 years old and she sees something wrong by seeing a panel of women on TV. Like, what is in her universe that is making this impact on her where she sees something wrong with that? And then, of course, I have to explain to her, like, they're the professionals. They're the experts in their field. That's why they're all there. They just happen to be the experts on this topic. And it makes complete sense. But it made me sad that, like, the world has already made this impression of what should be normal and what shouldn't be normal. And I realize this is very detracting probably for people who may watch this. But for me, that's really hard to comprehend, because you try to teach your kid as much as you can. You try to guide them in a very open, possibilities are endless. Like, take the path that makes the most sense for you. But what would I give them for advice when I see things like this? And I think is, don't have regrets. Because the moment you have any regret, the moment you have external worries, external concerns that aren't really things in your control, then you're losing. And this is one that, I struggled with early on in life, is like, I was wound up tighter than a drum. Like, I had to do something, this regiment, like I needed to make this happen. And I was not nice to a lot of people on that journey for that time frame, when I was like type A, hyped up. I want to be the best. Get out of my way if you're not. That was a hard lesson for me to take a step back, because I realized that I was going to pop. Like my stress level went up, and it was all self-induced. So for me, I really had to come to grips with the fact that, happiness isn't something you find. It isn't something it's a choice. You choose to be happy. You choose not to stress out about the things that are outside of your control. And really, that's what I really want to impart upon them, as far as control the controllables. And even managing 2 kids bickering and fighting, and they get upset about things. And I'm like, it's so funny to have a 4-year-old going, "Dad, I know what my consequences are." Because she already knows, like, your actions have consequences. But in the same sense, don't dwell on it. Like, don't focus in on these concerns and these issues. Like, recognize it, learn from it, like, wash your hands of it and move on. Don't let those situations rule your world, because it'll kill you. Like, it kills people every day with, just self-imposed stress. I don't want my kids to have that. I want them to understand you only control what is in your, realm of controllable functions. Everything else, accept it. You don't have regrets about things that you can't control, because I used to live in my head and I used to just run those same scenarios over and over. Like, okay, I should have done this. I should have said this. I should have been this. What a waste of resources. I wasted like hours of my life, whether it be laying in bed or anything else, but I wasted so much time of my life focusing on situations that never happened, or dwelling on, you know, a girlfriend that I broke up with, or she broke up with me. And I'm like, who cares? Like, I'm where I need to be now, and that's all that matters. So that's kind of what I would kind of try to impose on them the most.
Powerful. I have two more questions for you. We'll go back into the stock market talk a little bit here with some macros and just understanding how you use macros, if you use them. And there's a lot of talk about interest rates and, whether are they going to come down? Are they not? Are they going to impact us? Do they matter at all? For those of us nearer to retirement, for those of us who are younger in my situation, what's your take on that?
I definitely pay a lot of attention to them. So I mean, I'm always tracking the Fed. I'm always tracking the CPI data. I'm always tracking whatever the interest rates are happening, and what's going on. I'm always looking at the Treasury rates. Like, is the curve not going to inverse anymore? Like, is it going to come back to where it needs to be? Like, those are all factors that, they're directional. There's no crystal ball. Like, I see all these people like trying to read the tea leaves as best they can. All I can do is say, you know what? I look at the macros as best I can, but the reality is our environment today is totally different than what it was 5 years ago. You can't tell me that society is the same today as it was then. You can't tell me that all the things that are happening are the same. I'm not confident to look at those macros and say, yes, as soon as this one flips to this level, everything's going to adjust. Like, once interest rates hit this level, then, high growth stocks are going to blow up. Conventional wisdom says those are the things that should happen. But at the end of the day, humans are lemmings. Like, they follow the path they want to follow, and I can't gauge what that's going to be. As reality sets in, like that is one that I can't always gauge, because that's what really drives the markets. Like, consumer spending was so hot in fourth quarter last year. Everything was pointing to recession, recession, recession. But at the end of the day, people were like, screw you. We've been pent up for so long. The supply chain's finally getting back in place. We're giving our kids gifts. We're going to do this. Hell or high water. Let's make it happen. And the human factor played and changed the entire market setting. Something that should have been dwindling down just kind of kept going up, and it's like, all right, like we've got a good path forward. So to your point, macro, they very important. I look at them. Do I change my way and my dynamics that much? No, because I don't know what they mean right now, because everything is, it's kind of like a bizarro world. Everything's upside down. Like, what was up is now down, down is up. So I'm just here for the ride, and I'm just trying to be very smart about what I do with my investments and not over shift into any weird one direction, because I want to ride any storm as best I can. And you have to have balance for it. You have to have the dividend stock. You have to have the dividend ETF. Like, I want my delta to be as smoothed out as I can possibly make it, so that I can weather that a little bit better. I'm older. You're young. Your risk level should be your tolerance should be so much higher than mine. And it is. So I'm playing more of the, hey, I want to grow and sustain. I'm fine right where I'm at. If I just have like medium growth, perfectly fine with that. I can live on that. But I'm a little greedy. I do want more growth, but I can do it in a smart way that isn't gonna sell the farm.
I'm going to ask my favorite question I get to ask every master who comes on to the show. I have the tremendous honor and privilege of gifting a virtual non-existent $10,000 to you to invest in just one stock of your choice for the long haul. Call it your gamble. What stock would it be and why?
I'm thinking of me at my age set right now. I'd go all in with Apple. And I realize that's kind of Wow, what a generic thing to say. But for me, Apple is taking a major dive. Like, this year has just been a bad year for them. They will never probably have a year as bad as this one. So the reality is, I know that they are really going to ratchet it up a lot over the next several years. It's a safe play. If I'm only getting one company, to me, I think they're going to have the best potential. The reason why I'd pick that over an Amazon or any of the other ones is that, like, if you look at their cash holdings, it's massive. So there's no way that ship is going down anytime soon. So they have so much money on hand. In addition, you think about, they are going to make the biggest play on AI that we've probably ever seen. We just don't know yet because they're keeping it a secret. And I'm okay with that. So I really feel like it's a major dip, perfect time to buy. I can see them long term being very safe. That's why I would pick it pretty much over any others. Like, there's smaller companies that I like, but I don't know if they're a sure thing for the next 30, 40 years for me. So I don't want to bank on something that could disappear or be bought out in 5 years. So that's my choice. It's kind of a lame duck answer just because it's so safe. But that's me at 46. Now, if I was somebody much younger,
You get my
I,
notepad.
I would take a different approach. I would take more risk because it's only 10,000, right? Like, that's not going to break the bank. That's nothing. So if I was 25, 20, I would make a bet. I would probably go with probably a Palantir, because when I think about them as a company, their leadership is a little off, but I think that they have vision, and everyone recognizes the genius of that vision. I think that is a company that it's going to be in some ways kind of the next Microsoft if they can hit on all cylinders. There's so many things they need to work on. And one of those key areas, and I've spoken to this many times, they've been pretty much a government, or, mostly focused on defense. They started a hard push last year going into commercial. And I'm like, I tell you what, the moment they start pushing on commercial, that's when they're going to hit the margins, because everything on government contracts, it is a fixed margin. Like, there's no way around it. Like, you could get more expense, doesn't matter. You're going to keep your margin right where it is. They've been making a big push on commercial, and that's when their margins started to blow up. That's when the stock started to blow up. And really, I foresee them pushing like 90% of their business to commercial. At the moment that they can, like, they have a lot of years to go before they can do that. And that is one that I think is going to be cream for a lot of people for many, many years. But they're also high risk of being bought out if there's a company willing to do it, and it's not going to be an antitrust scenario, because anyone who understands, like, what they have, what their models are, like, any company would want to buy that. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been any push for it, but I think they're on that unicorn situation where they know their path. They know what they're going to be worth. They just need to be able to sell it, and they need to be able to implement. I think their biggest hurdle is implementation. They just need an army of people to implement, kind of like what all those third-party, Salesforce teams used to do. Like, they pushed hard on Salesforce. Get some of those third-party companies to do implementation for that, and it's going to be massive.
Investors, you've heard it here first. Business with Brian. Go to your search bar, type that in as I'm speaking right now. I have used Brian's channel personally to get new stock ideas, insights, tips and tricks, everything in between as a dividend investor to actually bring in growth opportunities so I can continue to build upon a solid wealth foundation. Get to Brian's channel. Brian, I want to thank you personally. It has been very powerful to have you on, and I look forward to hopefully having you on again. But
All
until
right,
then,
I
go
would
ahead.
love it. But next time, I'm going to ask you more questions,
Yeah.
because you actually have a really fascinating background. And, like, do you also have your certification for fireman one?
I do. I was I helped pay for college for myself from being a full-time firefighter.
See, like, that's depth. That's something I want to know more about next time, because you know what? I think you're going to probably do so much better than I did with my investments, because you're working it. You're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. I really do.
All right.
Sincerely. Investors, until the next episode, we will see you all there.